Today we're looking at 5 tips that are going to help you accelerate your language learning experience and get you moving along the journey more quickly and more efficiently. I suppose you could call this part 3.5 of the Getting into Language Learning series, mainly because I actually filmed all of these tips alongside the previous video about how to learn a language from scratch, and then decided that the video was already far too long, and so decided to split it up, and so here we are. So if you haven't seen that video or any of the other parts in the series, then I'll leave links to those down in the description below, but without any further ado, let's get straight into the tips. Tip number 1 is to have no expectations. Now, I specifically haven't addressed the commonly asked question in this sort of sphere of how long will it take me to get to this stage of fluency or absolute proficiency or whatever, because it's just an unanswerable question in my opinion. It's entirely individual. It depends on you, how you learn, blah 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 blah. Now, you should absolutely set yourself goals in terms of what kind of things you want to achieve, but you don't want to get trapped in the idea of a time scale. You don't want to be thinking, okay, so if I put this much time in every day, then I'll reach this point by this time, because it just really doesn't work like that, and you might find yourself getting a bit disheartened when that doesn't turn out to be the reality. Tip number 2, write everything down. Let me just repeat that quickly in case it wasn't entirely clear. Write everything down. I cannot stress this point enough. It is so important that you write stuff down. When I talk about building your knowledge base, I'm literally talking about a physical body of resources and materials that you can refer back to. Now, whether you choose to make that a sort of paper-based system or to use a digital system, that's up to you. Either way, write everything down. Take notes, track the new things that you learn, the vocab, the grammar, and write out example sentences in terms of grammar that you can use, where you substitute in new vocab to test your understanding of grammar, and make it a resource that you can easily refer back to in the future to check on things and that you're going to understand. Remember, your future self is not the same as your current self, so what your current self may be thinking will not be the same as what your future self is thinking. Where am I going with this? Basically, make the notes understandable for your future self. Don't just think about what your current self is thinking right now. Tip number 3, and sort of linked in a way to tip number 2, is to track your progress. Keeping a track of where you were, where you are now, and where you're going in your language learning journey is a very powerful thing to do. Not least because it can provide some inspiration when you look back at some of your earlier work and you see, quite how far you've come. But it's also a good way of checking what you need to work on still. So you should keep a record of your written work, individual sentences at the start probably, but then, paragraphs, essays, etc. And you should also record your voice. Ideally, on video. It can be very uncomfortable listening to the sound of your own voice on a recording or on camera, especially if it's in a foreign language that you're not entirely familiar with, so there's going to be mistakes, your accent's maybe going to sound a little bit strange, but it's incredibly useful for analysing your oral performance, because you can play it back. You can see how you sounded, see what kind of mistakes you were making, check your pronunciation, and that way you can see what you need to work on, but also just, patting yourself on the back, seeing what you're able to do, and then recognising how much progress you've made between where you made your video and where you are now. Tip number 4 is to understand the difference between casual learning and more sort of intense study sessions. So what do I mean by casual learning? I'm talking about, kicking back, putting a film on, or, listening to a podcast in in your language of choice, and just sort of passively listening to it, maybe even doing something else at the same time. And that's certainly important, that does have its place, and it can be very useful. But if you're not complementing that with sort of proper, sitting down, flashcards out, dictionary at the ready style study sessions, then you're really not going to make a lot of progress. Similarly, if all you do is bury your face in the dictionary or intensely dissect every tiny little aspect of a book or a film, then you're going to burn out and you're going to bore yourself senseless. It's not going to be fun at all to learn that way. Learning should be fun, and that means complementing your intense study sessions with just kicking back, putting a film on, with a beer in your hand, trying to understand what's going on, but not also sat there with a dictionary grasped firmly in your hand, ready to pause the film and look up a word every single time something comes up that you don't understand. In terms of listening practice, I would actually say that's less useful than just sitting back and trying to understand what's going on in a film. Tip number 5 is little and often is better than a lot, not very often. Okay, that sounded a bit better in my head, but I think you get the picture. Basically, ideally we'd all like to spend 2 to 3 hours a day working on our language of choice, and you should of course spend as long as you can afford to on your language if you want to make some good progress, but sometimes things come up. We can't always dedicate that amount of time. It may be that on a particular day you've only got 15 or even 10 minutes to spare. The point I'm trying to make is use that time. Don't skip it, because it would be quite easy to skip it in that situation. Use the time, even for just a quick refresher, listening to the language being spoken or, seeing it written down, reading it written down. That's going to provide a useful refresher and is better than just skipping the time altogether. Let's compare that with, say, working for 3 hours on a Sunday and then not seeing the language again at all until the following Sunday. All that's going to happen is you're going to forget the material in between. So try and go for longer study sessions every single day if you can, but on a particular given day, if you can only fit in a few minutes, a little bit of practice is still going to go further than just nothing at all. So there we have it, 5 tips for improving your language learning experience. If you can internalize and incorporate these ideas into your learning, then it's going to help to solidify your base and keep you moving along the path, and hopefully keep you motivated as well. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate people taking time out of their day to listen to me waffling on about God knows what. If you found something useful here, then maybe consider leaving a like, as that helps to shove the video in front of other people's faces in the hope that they might also find it useful. And if you want to see more videos like this, then hover over that subscribe button, give it a click. You can also click over here to check out my channel, or you can click just over here to watch my previous video on how to learn a language from scratch. That's it from me today, so thanks once again for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again in another video very soon. Goodbye.